The Middle East, once again, the world's most volatile chessboard, is on fire. The Gaza Strip, a narrow stretch of land barely 40 kilometers long, has become the epicenter of a brutal conflict that now threatens to spill beyond its borders. Explosions light up the night sky, and each strike carries echoes of wars past, reminders that this land has never truly known peace. In recent months, tensions between Israel and Hamas have reignited with deadly force. What began as a series of border skirmishes and political provocations quickly escalated into all-out warfare. Cities across southern Israel have come under rocket fire. The Israeli Defense Forces have responded with relentless airstrikes. And in the heart of Gaza, entire neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble. To the outside world, the Gaza war might appear like another tragic chapter in a long and endless story, one that flares up every few years before fading from the headlines. But this time, it feels different. The rhetoric is harsher, the stakes are higher, and the players involved, both regional and global, are taking sides more openly than ever before. As Israel vows to dismantle Hamas once and for all, world powers are watching closely. Iran, a longtime backer of Hamas, has hinted at direct intervention. The United States, traditionally Israel's strongest ally, faces growing internal pressure to restrain the conflict. Meanwhile, Russia and China, eager to challenge U.S. influence, have been quick to exploit the chaos, calling for peace while quietly arming and funding their regional partners. The result is a fragile balance on the brink of collapse, a conflict that could at any moment spiral into something much larger, a regional war, a global crisis, perhaps even the next great test of American power. And into this storm steps one man, a man whose very name divides nations and unites headlines: Donald J. Trump. Donald Trump has never been a man to stay silent, especially when the world is burning. As the conflict in Gaza deepened, Trump broke his silence with words that sent shockwaves through both Washington and Tel Aviv. If Hamas continues to cling to power, he declared, they could face complete obliteration. It was a statement that immediately went viral, praised by some as the kind of bold, uncompromising stance that defined Trump's presidency, and condemned by others as reckless, inflammatory, and dangerously simplistic. But for Trump's supporters, it was vintage Donald Trump, direct, unapologetic, and rooted in the idea that strength is the only language the Middle East understands. To understand Trump's approach, one must look back at his presidency. His foreign policy was often described as America first, but in practice, it meant America decides. He moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and brokered the Abraham Accords, historic normalization deals between Israel and several Arab nations. Critics said Trump was destabilizing the region. Supporters said he was bringing peace through strength. And now, as he eyes a potential return to the White House, Trump is once again positioning himself as the man who can end wars by winning them. In interviews and rallies, he has hinted at a swift and final solution to the Gaza crisis, a strategy built on total deterrence. He speaks often of re-establishing U.S. dominance in the region, of restoring fear in America's enemies, and of ensuring that no terrorist organization ever thinks it can outlast the will of the United States. His language is stark, even brutal, but it resonates with millions of Americans who believe that weakness, not war, invites chaos. And amid growing discontent over rising energy prices, inflation, and the perception that President Biden's foreign policy has been indecisive, Trump's words strike a familiar chord. The Gaza war is not just a regional fight. It's a global stage. And every missile that explodes, every headline that flashes across the screen, carries implications far beyond the Middle East. In Washington, the Biden administration walks a tightrope. On one side stands Israel, America's longtime ally, a nation that has received billions in U.S. aid and security guarantees. On the other side, a restless public, increasingly skeptical of foreign wars, increasingly frustrated with inflation, and increasingly divided over what America's role in the world should be. President Biden has urged restraint, calling for measured responses and proportional defense. But critics argue that such language projects weakness, not diplomacy. Trump and his allies have seized on that perception. At rallies across the country, he repeats the same line again and again. Under my watch, none of this would have happened. It's a message that resonates with voters who remember his tenure as one of order through fear. Whether fair or not, that image works in his favor. His supporters see him as a man who can stand up to Iran, to Hamas, to anyone who dares to challenge American dominance. And while the Biden administration struggles to maintain a coalition of cautious allies, Trump speaks in absolutes. He doesn't call for peace talks. He calls for victory. He doesn't talk about stability. He talks about ending the threat permanently. To his critics, that's dangerous. To his base, that's leadership. Meanwhile, on the ground, Israel's campaign in Gaza grows more intense. Reports from the region describe urban combat unlike anything seen in years. The Israeli Defense Forces are pushing deeper into Hamas-controlled zones, using advanced AI-assisted targeting systems and precision-guided munitions. The goal is total elimination, but at a devastating human cost. Civilians are trapped, infrastructure is collapsing, and humanitarian groups warn that Gaza is on the verge of total societal breakdown. Yet even amid the chaos, Hamas remains defiant. Its leaders, sheltered in tunnels and hidden compounds, vow to fight until the last breath. For Trump, this war represents both a tragedy and an opportunity. A tragedy because it underscores how fragile the peace he once claimed to broker has become. An opportunity because it allows him to contrast his style of governance, decisive, confrontational, unapologetically pro-Israel, against the current administration's cautious diplomacy. Every photo of burning streets in Gaza, every image of a U.S. envoy pleading for a ceasefire becomes a talking point for Trump's campaign. He tells his crowds, "They're weak. They negotiate with terrorists. We don't do that. We win." And for millions of Americans tired of seeing headlines about foreign chaos and domestic uncertainty, that message hits home. The Trump doctrine, if one can call it that, rests on a simple premise: peace through dominance. It's not about alliances or multilateralism. It's about deterrence. The belief that overwhelming force prevents war because no one dares to test it. During his presidency, Trump used this logic repeatedly. He ordered the strike that killed Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. He confronted North Korea's Kim Jong-un with fire and fury. He imposed crushing sanctions on Tehran and withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, calling it a disaster. Those actions, controversial, even reckless to some, nonetheless projected power. And in Trump's view, they worked. The world, he argues, was quieter when America was feared. Today, as the Middle East edges toward chaos, that argument feels alive again. Even foreign leaders who once criticized Trump are now acknowledging, quietly, that the region's balance of terror was, in some strange way, more stable under his rule. In capitals from Riyadh to Tel Aviv, diplomats whisper a similar sentiment. Say what you want about Trump, but at least everyone knew where the lines were. That's the paradox of the Trump era, unpredictability that somehow created order. And for a world now spiraling toward instability, that paradox is suddenly appealing again. Trump's declaration that Hamas could face complete obliteration if it clings to power, didn't just echo through Washington, it sent shockwaves across the entire geopolitical landscape. To his supporters, it was a reminder of America's once unquestioned dominance. To his critics, it was a dangerous spark thrown into a region already burning. In Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reacted swiftly. His office released a statement calling Trump's warning a reflection of moral clarity, a phrase loaded with meaning. For Netanyahu, still navigating the fallout of his own war decisions, Trump's words brought political oxygen. Israeli media openly speculated that Trump's potential return to the White House could restore the era of maximum support, when Israel acted boldly and Washington stood firmly behind it. Within hours, right-wing Israeli politicians and commentators were celebrating online, declaring, "Trump gets it." He understands the language of power, but across the border in Tehran, the tone was radically different. Iranian state television accused Trump of inciting genocide, and senior members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps vowed revenge. Intelligence sources in Europe have already detected increased movement among Iran-backed militias in Iraq and Syria. Hezbollah issued a statement warning that any attack on Gaza will not go unanswered. In essence, Iran and its proxies are preparing for the possibility of a wider confrontation, one that could stretch from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf. Europe, as usual, finds itself caught between values and survival. French President Emmanuel Macron called Trump's comments unhelpful, while Germany's foreign ministry urged measured language. The UK, struggling with its own domestic pressures, quietly urged Israel to exercise restraint. Yet, in diplomatic circles, a quiet truth lingers. Many European leaders fear that Trump's possible comeback could undo years of delicate Middle Eastern diplomacy. One EU diplomat, speaking anonymously, admitted, "Whether you agree or not, Trump changes the equation. He forces everyone to take sides. In Moscow, the Kremlin wasted no time exploiting the chaos." Russian officials framed Trump's words as proof of Western hypocrisy, that America preaches peace but practices force. State-run media ran segments showing Trump's speech side by side with footage of bombed-out neighborhoods in Gaza, drawing a narrative of moral collapse in the West. At the same time, Putin's government offered to mediate peace talks, a move no one takes seriously, but one that keeps Russia's hand visible on the global chessboard. Meanwhile, China took a different path, quiet, strategic, and patient. Beijing sees every U.S. crisis as an opening. Chinese diplomats increased meetings with Iranian counterparts, offering trade incentives and political cover. Through its Belt and Road Initiative, China continues deepening its influence across the Gulf, financing reconstruction projects that Western companies won't touch. As one analyst put it, while America argues, China invests. Trump's fiery rhetoric for Beijing is both a risk and an opportunity, a moment when the U.S. appears strong but divided. In the Arab world, reactions are mixed and emotionally charged. Saudi Arabia, which had been cautiously pursuing normalization with Israel before the war reignited, has gone silent. Public anger on Arab streets makes diplomacy nearly impossible. Egypt and Jordan, longtime mediators, now face protests and domestic unrest. For them, Trump's warning of obliteration sounds like an echo from the darkest days of Middle Eastern history. Yet in places like the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, leaders quietly nod in approval. They see Trump's language not as cruelty, but as deterrence, a show of power that might finally force Hamas to back down. Inside the United States, the divide grows sharper by the day. Democrats call Trump's comments irresponsible and dangerous, accusing him of turning tragedy into campaign fuel. Republicans, meanwhile, rally behind him. They frame his stance as decisive leadership, a sharp contrast to what they see as President Biden's cautious, reactive diplomacy. Fox News commentators argue that Trump projects strength, while CNN panels warn of moral collapse. The result is predictable. The more controversial Trump's words, the more they dominate the airwaves. He doesn't chase headlines, he creates them. Even without holding office, Trump's influence is undeniable. His statement reshaped diplomatic conversations from Jerusalem to Doha, from Washington to Brussels. Intelligence agencies across multiple countries began drafting contingency reports, not because of official policy, but because of a speech. That is the enduring reality of Trump's presence on the world stage. He doesn't just lead political movements. He moves global markets, shapes media narratives, and redefines alliances with. As the dust from recent battles settles over Gaza's broken skyline, the world faces a haunting question. What comes next? For decades, the cycle of war, ceasefire, and reconstruction has defined this small strip of land. But this time, something feels different, more dangerous, more uncertain, and more defining for America's future on the world stage. Inside Gaza, the situation is catastrophic. Entire neighborhoods lie in ruins, basic infrastructure has collapsed, and hospitals struggle to function without fuel or medicine. For civilians, survival itself is a daily negotiation between hunger, airstrikes, and political chaos. Aid agencies warn that without immediate and sustained relief, famine and disease could sweep through the enclave within months. Yet, as the humanitarian crisis deepens, global attention shifts from compassion to politics. The United States, under the Biden administration, walks a razor's edge. Washington publicly calls for restraint, humanitarian corridors, and long-term peace frameworks. But behind the scenes, the pressure mounts. Every new explosion in Gaza sparks protests in American cities, dividing communities along ideological and generational lines. Younger voters, especially, are turning away from traditional alliances, demanding accountability and balance. For the White House, this conflict has become more than a foreign policy issue. It's a domestic political time bomb. And into that volatile mix steps Donald Trump. His campaign rallies now feature Gaza as a central theme, framed not as a tragedy, but as proof of American weakness under Biden. He promises strength, decisive action, and peace through power. He speaks not in diplomatic nuance, but in absolutes, a language that resonates with millions who feel America has lost its grip. To them, Trump's message isn't about Gaza at all. It's about reclaiming national pride. The foreign policy establishment, however, sees peril. If Trump were to return to the Oval Office, the U.S. approach to the Middle East would likely shift dramatically, back to the America First doctrine that prioritizes allies who fight, not negotiate. That could mean tighter alignment with Israel, harsher sanctions on Iran, and a potential withdrawal of support from international organizations seen as biased. Such moves would reshape global diplomacy overnight, redrawing alliances that took generations to build. For Israel, Trump's return could mean the green light to pursue a final confrontation with Hamas, one that ends the group's rule entirely, whatever the human cost. For Iran, it would mean renewed economic strangulation and potential covert operations. And for Palestinians, it could spell both danger and opportunity. Danger from more aggressive Israeli policy, but opportunity if regional powers, fearing escalation, finally push for a lasting solution. Beyond the region, the world's balance of power continues to shift. China's influence grows. Russia plays the opportunist, and Europe hesitates. The vacuum left by America's divided leadership invites chaos, and chaos, as history shows, rarely stays contained. If the U.S. cannot project a unified vision, others will fill that void with agendas far removed from democratic values. But perhaps the most profound question lies within America itself. The Gaza war has become a mirror, reflecting the nation's internal fracture. The left and right no longer simply disagree on tactics, they disagree on morality, truth, and identity. For some, supporting Israel remains a moral duty. For others, it's complicity in oppression. News outlets, universities, and even churches are split. The debate over Gaza has become a debate over what kind of country America wants to be: cautious and compassionate, or strong and uncompromising. And Trump knows this better than anyone. He thrives on division, but he also understands momentum. In every crisis, he sees opportunity, not to heal, but to define. And that's why Gaza, far from being a distant war, could become the crucible in which America's next political era is forged. Because in the end, this isn't just about borders or missiles. It's about who controls the narrative, who decides what strength, justice, and leadership mean in a world spiraling toward disorder. And that brings us to the final question of this unfolding story, one that every American, ally, and adversary must soon face. In times of chaos, leadership is not just measured by decisions, but by consequences. Donald Trump's words, his warnings, his threats, his promises now hang over the Middle East like storm clouds over a fragile sea. To his followers, he represents a return to power, pride, and clarity. To his critics, he is the embodiment of risk, a man who could turn conflict into catastrophe. But love him or hate him, one truth remains: Trump has changed the way America speaks to the world. And in this age of divided nations and endless wars, words are weapons, sharper than missiles, louder than bombs. The Gaza conflict will not end overnight. Peace, if it comes, will demand courage, patience, and vision. Yet the tone has been set. The world is watching, waiting for America's next move, and for the man who may once again decide its course. In the shadow of war, amid the echoes of obliteration, one question still burns. Will the next chapter bring stability, or the beginning of something far more dangerous?